Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Now What podcast, episode 4. My name is Glenn Sharp. I am President and CEO of Sharp Leadership Development. If you've been following the podcast, you know this is a little bit of a different setting. This is the golf simulator in the Sharp Leadership Development studio, also known as my lower level, my man cave. But this will make sense in just a few minutes. When I introduce you to the new concept, I'm going to relate it to golf, one of my passions. But if you've been following along with episodes 1, 2, and 3, you know that this podcast is about my book, Now What? It's available on Amazon, paperback or ebook. So the podcast is really about, and the book is really about coaching Johnny. Johnny is the character in the book, and he is a brand new manager. Right? He was an amazing mechanic, still is an amazing mechanic, but because he's so good at being a mechanic, the assumption was he'd be a good manager. And so they made him manager of mechanics, and obviously he doesn't know how to be a manager. And unfortunately, for a lot of organizations, they make the assumption just because you're a good individual contributor, that must mean you're a good manager. And in some cases, that is exactly true. But in Johnny's case, he has no idea how to be a manager. He's no longer turning wrenches. Now he is doing performance appraisals, he's counseling employees, he's managing personalities, and everything in between. So now what? Hence the name of the book. In the first few episodes, I introduced you to some concepts. In episode 1, I introduced you to the results cone. The results cone works from the bottom up, not the top down. Your thinking drives your behavior. Your behavior drives your results. The unfortunate reality in business today is most people go after results, and it's literally the exact opposite path to success. I got to change the way you think first. Then you'll be willing to change your behavior. Results are a lagging indicator. And in Johnny's case, he's got to think differently. He's no longer a mechanic. He's a manager of mechanics, and that's a different position and comes with a different skill set. So that was incredibly important for him to understand. In episode 2, we talked about the famous proactive versus reactive graph. It's also known as green line versus red line. This comes from my change management class at the University of Cincinnati. It's a graduate level course, and it's definitely the star of the class. They obviously love this concept. And the way it works is the green line is being proactive. The red line is being reactive, right? And if you know anything about successful people, the common denominator in all successful people that I know is that they do most of the work up front. Most of the battle is won up front. So they prepare, they make sure they get their ducks in a row. They make sure they train their individuals on their team before they set them loose, right? And the interesting part about the green line is most people, if you follow the green line, they see when managers are on maintenance mode and after they put in all that work, and they see what a successful team looks like. But what they didn't see is all the time and effort and all the work it took to get to that point. Right? And I ask classes all the time, and I asked you guys on the podcast, if you're honest, are you more proactive or reactive? Are you more green line or red line? And again, the basic premise behind the graph is people who follow that green line don't experience half the things that people who follow that red line experience. If you recall in episode 2, I also challenged you with a different aspect of this graph, and that is the green line represents, am I investing my time? The red line represents, am I spending my time? And I challenge you guys to really think, what are you spending your time on? Asking yourself in every task that you do, is this the best use of my time? And I challenge you guys to really think about whether or not you are putting your time and effort into the right places, right? And you can obviously check out episode 2 for that. In the third episode, I mentioned to you guys how important the concept of emotional intelligence is, EQ, right? And we discussed EQ in the context of Myers-Briggs and the 4 dichotomies of Myers-Briggs and how that relates to the work environment. Again, the basic premise behind that concept is if you want to influence someone, who's more important, you or them? And the answer, of course, is them. So you got to get to know them. You got to put it in terms that they can understand. You have to make sure you understand the personality of the person, the way they think. And that's really what episode 3 was all about. So episode 4 is going to be along the same track, starting to get into more tactical aspects of the management position. This particular concept is called the change curve of human behavior. You notice it's typical curve continuum, but there's 2 different ways to look at this change curve. Right? And the basic premise behind this concept is the following. Is it possible to change behavior without going through some sort of discomfort? And the answer is no, it's not possible. And that's the reason why, in my opinion, so many change efforts fail. It's because people are unwilling to actually go through the pain, go through the discomfort of the change. All right, and the way the change curve works, if you notice, I might have somebody in front of me and I go over a change with them, and initially there's some excitement, right? And it might even sound good to them. But eventually they got to get down to the valley of despair, right? And it's not my terminology, valley of despair. It's a little hokey, but it does the trick. Basically, the valley of despair is obviously they're making mistakes. They're getting frustrated, right? They want to give up. And to be honest with you, most people give up. All right, and that's the reason why most change efforts in organizations fail. Right, so one of the things I want you guys to think about is another point of view. My job is to change the way you think. Right? So another way to look at this is, imagine if you and your direct reports, before you introduce a change to your folks, imagine if you said to them, listen, we know there's going to be resistance. We know people are going to get frustrated. We know that they're going to want to give up. Let's talk about it now. Let's talk about a response now before it actually happens, so that when they're in the valley of despair, we're prepared for it. And that's the second aspect of this change curve. Every CEO that I know who's really good at introducing change, they never freak out. They never get angry. They never overreact when people start to fail, when people start to get frustrated and complain. And the reason why is because they expected this. Right? Not only do they understand in this continuum that it's going to happen, they realize it's a necessary part of change. And Peter Block's model, I'm a huge fan of Peter Block. He talks about resistance in the context of not only is it going to happen, it's a necessary component to change. Right? There has to be resistance. And when you think about your lives, think about the times when you grew the most in your life. It's probably when you went through that valley of despair, when you went through the tough times. That's when you grew the most. So the second aspect of this concept is what all successful managers do, and that is when it gets rough, when they go through that valley of despair, they say to themselves, good, they're halfway there. Rather than freaking out, they know that this is a part of the change effort. This is a part of learning. This is part of what it takes to get to commitments. And they understand that, so they don't overreact. And by the way, they also planned for it. They also have a united front with their direct supervisors, and they were expecting this. And that's one of the things I want you guys to consider. Before you ever make a change, make sure you and your direct reports are on the same page. Make sure you prepare for the inevitable resistance that is going to happen. It has to happen. Right? And how does this relate to golf? Well, the interesting part about golf, in my opinion, is how many people would rather buy a $700 golf club than take a lesson. And the question is why? Why would they spend that kind of money rather than take a lesson? And the answer is because lessons are hard. It's actually miserable to take a golf lesson, especially if you're not playing well or if you have flaws in your swing like I did. Right? But if you're willing to go through the pain and suffering, if you're willing to actually work at it and do the hard stuff, it's amazing the results that you can get. And I know I've taken many lessons, and one particular lesson, I said to the instructor, I swear to you I can actually play golf. But he changed my swing so dramatically that I could barely hit the ball. But then eventually you get a bucket of balls, and eventually you hit a few, and then eventually you hear that amazing sound of the 7-iron hitting that right in the middle of the club, and it goes 180 yards, right? And you just want more and more and more of it. And it's a nice metaphor for business, right? right? That's what it takes to succeed in business and to make sure that you change behavior. And one of the things I ask classes all the time, especially in the graduate class, is the following. If you don't change, in 5 years, what is your organization going to look like if you don't do anything different? And the answer is typically, we're going to go out of business, or we'll have, obviously, competition surpass us. And I say, okay, so we all agree change is necessary. If you're honest with me, when you introduce change to your team, when you introduce change to your organization, what is the typical response? And the typical response, according to them, and obviously I've seen this as well, is it can't work. They make excuses why it cannot work. There's no way. They'll say things like, well, we've always done this way. Why would we change, right? It's always resistance. And there's the dichotomy in change, right? You know you have to change. You know it's necessary. But then the human reaction to change is typically why we can't do it versus why we can do it. And that's what I want to challenge you guys with in regards to you and your teams, right? Preparing them ahead of time. I always promote, situational training, as you know. We talked about that in the last episode. But also, I want my people to come up with ideas for change. So I would ask them in every single meeting, hey, listen, every single time we meet, every single Friday when we meet, each one of you have to come up with a change that you want to implement in the company or on our team in order to improve things. And there is no shrugging shoulders. There is no, I forgot. If you do not come up with that, I'm going to hold you accountable. But we're going to start to come up with change and change ideas before we actually need them and anticipate and be proactive versus reactive. And what that'll do is that'll get them into a habit. And at first, there's going to be, again, a little bit of resistance. They're going to roll their eyes. But eventually, if they're anything like my team that I used to manage, all of a sudden someone will look at another person and go, you know what? That's a good idea, man. That's a really good idea. And the interesting part about change is you don't implement the change that you introduced in the beginning. You guys are going to scrub it. You guys are going to tweak it. You guys are going to discuss it. But even if you change just a little bit, even if you just take one small aspect of the change that's introduced, you still have improvement. And that's the way to really get your folks in line in regards to understanding change and getting them into the habit of anticipating change. Obviously, the change curve will go a lot smoother. You'll shallow that valley of despair, but you don't want to eliminate it because you want to go through some discomfort because that's the only way that they're really going to learn. So that's really the change curve, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you think about how this would relate to your team. If you want to purchase the book, Now What? It's available, as you can see, on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I wish you all the luck in your management and leadership journey, and I'll see you in episode 5.